When I first heard about the Vikings, I imagined blood, fire, and ships full of screaming warriors. And honestly, that part is true. But here's what no one told me. They were also poets, engineers, explorers who reached North America 500 years before Columbus. One moment, they're burning a monastery to the ground. The next, they're settling down to trade silk from Baghdad. How does a culture so feared become so influential? And what really ended the Viking Age? In the next few minutes, we're going to uncover the hidden world of the Vikings, and I promise it's nothing like the movies. Welcome, history lovers and curious minds. Today we embark on an epic voyage through the world of the Vikings, a world full of contradictions. They were brutal and brilliant, fierce and philosophical. They lived in a harsh land, forged by ice and sea, but created one of the most dynamic and far-reaching cultures of the early Middle Ages. From raiding monasteries to founding cities, from telling tales of Norse gods to navigating the treacherous Atlantic, to discover new continents, the Vikings left an indelible mark on Europe and beyond. And understanding their story isn't just about war and conquest. It's about survival, exploration, mythology, and legacy. Whether you're a beginner or a die-hard Viking enthusiast, this is the full story. So grab your metaphorical axe, or maybe just some popcorn, and let's set sail through time. To understand the Viking explosion in the 8th century, we need to rewind a few centuries. Before they were known as Vikings, the people of Scandinavia were a collection of tribal societies scattered across modern-day Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. These weren't the centralized kingdoms you'd find in medieval France or the Byzantine Empire. They were decentralized clans, tied together by kinship and loyalty to powerful chieftains. Life revolved around survival, farming in rocky soil, fishing the icy waters of the fjords, and enduring long, brutal winters. So how did they live? The land. Scandinavia was, and still is, a landscape of extremes. Towering mountains cut through deep fjords, thick forests teemed with wolves and elk, and the seasons swung between sun-drenched summers and endless winter nights. Because the terrain was so harsh, agriculture was tough. Farmers grew barley, rye, and oats, but harvests were unpredictable. Animal husbandry, raising sheep, pigs, cattle, and goats, was often more reliable. Fish, particularly herring and cod, were also staples. The people. The society was divided roughly into 3 classes. Jarls, the aristocratic warrior elite who ruled clans and led raids. Carls, free men and women who worked as farmers, traders, and craftsmen. Thralls, enslaved people, often captives from war, who worked the land or served in households. Despite the class system, Viking society was surprisingly mobile. A Carl could rise to become a Jarl through bravery in battle or shrewd business sense. Even thralls could sometimes earn or be granted freedom. Gender roles. Here's something that may surprise you. Viking women enjoyed more rights and independence than most of their European counterparts. Women could own property, divorce their husbands, and in some cases, wield political power. There are even sagas and historical records of women warriors, shield maidens, who fought alongside men. While historians debate their existence, archaeological finds like the Birka warrior grave suggest they may have been real. Religion. Norse religion was polytheistic and animistic. People believed the world was alive with spirits, gods, giants, elves, and land spirits called landvættir. The gods of the Norse pantheon, Odin, Thor, Freyja, Loki, reflected the values and fears of Viking society. Odin, the All-Father, was the god of wisdom, war, and death. Thor, the thunder god, was the protector of humanity. Freyja ruled over love, fertility, and battle. And Loki, the trickster, caused chaos, but also moved the stories forward. Their myths were passed down orally in poems, chants, and riddles. And they believed in fate, a fixed destiny woven by the Norns, 3 supernatural sisters. Even the gods could not escape fate, which would ultimately lead to Ragnarok, the end of the world. But before that end, a new beginning was about to rise from the waves. The year was 793 AD. The location, Lindisfarne, a small island off the northeastern coast of England. It was home to a Christian monastery, a peaceful place of worship and scholarship. But on one fateful summer day, that peace was shattered. Longships appeared on the horizon, swift and silent. Armed warriors stormed the shore. They plundered the monastery, slaughtered monks, looted sacred treasures, and set the buildings ablaze. For many in Christian Europe, it was not just an attack, it was an apocalyptic omen. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle recorded it in horror. In this year came dreadful forewarnings over the land of the Northumbrians. Fiery dragons were seen flying in the air. A great famine soon followed, and a little after that, in the same year, the harrowing inroads of heathen men made lamentable havoc in the Church of God in Holy Island. This event didn't happen in isolation. It marked the beginning of what historians now call the Viking Age, a period of roughly 250 years when Norse warriors, traders, and settlers transformed the map of Europe. But why did they start raiding? Theories behind the Viking expansion. 1. Economic pressures. Scandinavia had limited arable land, especially in Norway. Younger sons who wouldn't inherit land sought wealth and status elsewhere. 2. Population growth. Increased populations may have created more competition for resources. 3. Political instability. Power struggles among chieftains and the rise of centralized authority created warrior classes eager for conquest. 4th, technological innovation. The longship gave Vikings unprecedented mobility. They could strike fast, vanish quickly, and navigate both open seas and inland rivers. 5th, external provocation. Charlemagne's forced Christianization of the Saxons may have antagonized neighboring pagan groups, including the Norse. After Lindisfarne, more raids followed. 794, Jarrow and Wearmouth monasteries. 795, raids on Ireland and the Scottish Isles. 799, the Franks' coastal territories attacked. By the early 9th century, Viking raids evolved into full-scale invasions. Bands of raiders grew into armies. Temporary camps became permanent settlements. In Ireland, they founded coastal strongholds that later became cities: Dublin, Wexford, Waterford. In Scotland, they clashed with Picts and Celts, ultimately dominating the Northern and Western Isles. In England, they returned again and again, eventually seizing entire kingdoms. But they weren't just interested in raiding, they were interested in opportunity. And soon the Vikings would go from looters to landlords. To truly understand how the Vikings conquered oceans, rivers, and continents, you have to look at their greatest invention, the longship. This wasn't just a boat. It was the space shuttle of the Viking Age. It combined speed, flexibility, and sheer engineering brilliance in a way that gave the Norse an overwhelming strategic advantage. The design. Viking longships were long, narrow vessels with a shallow draft, meaning they could sail in both deep seas and shallow rivers. This made them incredibly versatile. They could travel across the open ocean, then head inland through tiny rivers, catch unsuspecting settlements off guard, and be gone before anyone had time to respond. Each ship had a large sail, usually made from wool and dyed in striking patterns, often red and white, but also came equipped with oars, giving it mobility regardless of wind. The hull was clinker-built, meaning the planks overlapped like fish scales. This gave it strength and flexibility in rough seas. But perhaps their greatest feature? Speed. A well-crewed longship could travel over 100 miles in a single day, unheard of for the time. And the dragon-headed prow. It wasn't just decoration. It was psychological warfare. Those terrifying carved beasts were meant to frighten enemies and ward off sea monsters. In fact, Vikings sometimes removed the dragon heads when approaching friendly or sacred lands so they wouldn't anger local spirits. Imagine the sight. A foggy morning, the tide low, and out of the mist a black silhouette rises. A long, thin vessel, the sail bulging in the wind, oars churning the water, and at its head, the snarling mouth of a dragon. That image alone was enough to make some villages flee before a single axe was raised. Other innovations. The Vikings didn't stop at ships. Their technological prowess extended to weaponry. Viking swords were called ulfberts, some made of such pure steel they rivaled later medieval blades. Their axes, often mistaken as crude, were actually elegant tools of both war and work. Navigational tools. They may have used sunstones to navigate even when the sun was obscured, allowing them to travel vast distances with shocking accuracy. Craftsmanship. From wooden combs and carved bone to intricate jewelry, Viking artisanship was refined and beautiful. Their knotwork, runestones, and even burial ships reveal a people as artistic as they were warlike. They weren't just pirates with boats. They were engineers, explorers, innovators. Which leads us to the question, how did such a small population manage to influence so much of the world? The answer lies in their society, which we'll now dive into. While pop culture loves to show Vikings as battle-crazed raiders, the truth is far more nuanced. Most Norse people never went raiding at all. They were farmers, traders, and craftsmen, deeply tied to their land and families. Let's step into the day-to-day life of a Viking. The Viking home. Most Viking families lived on farms or in rural settlements. Their homes were longhouses, wooden structures with thick thatched roofs and a single large room. Families cooked over an open fire in the center, slept in alcoves along the walls, and shared space with livestock during harsh winters. Life was hard. Winters were long, food could be scarce, and disease was common. But the bonds of community ran deep. Hospitality was sacred, and feasting was central to culture, not just for celebration, but for forging alliances and remembering ancestors. Men, women, and children. Viking society was stratified, but surprisingly flexible. Jarls were the nobles, wealthy landowners and warriors who led in peace and war. Carls were the everyday free people, the bulk of Viking society. They could own land, vote in the local assembly, thing, and go raiding or trade. Thralls were slaves, either born into servitude or captured during raids. While thralls had few rights, some could earn or be granted their freedom. Women in Viking society had far more autonomy than in most of medieval Europe. They could inherit property, divorce their husbands, run farms, and even lead voyages. Some were Seder practitioners, mystical figures who practiced Norse magic. And recent archaeology suggests that women did in fact go into battle, like the woman buried in Birka, Sweden, with a full warrior's grave. Children were expected to contribute early. Boys learned to farm, hunt, or sail. Girls learned to manage the home and prepare herbs, textiles, or food. By age 12 or 13, many were considered adults. Honor and law. Vikings had no kings in early days. Instead, they held assemblies called things, where free men voted on disputes, crafted laws, and settled feuds. Honor was everything. If someone insulted your family, attacked your farm, or broke a promise, it could trigger a blood feud lasting generations. Revenge wasn't just allowed, it was expected. but legal systems existed to prevent chaos. You could pay vergild, a man price, to settle killings without more bloodshed. The sagas are full of stories about honor, betrayal, vengeance, and oaths. These were not lawless savages. They were people bound by tradition and pride. Religion and the gods. Norse religion was animistic and polytheistic, full of powerful gods, giants, spirits, and omens. Odin, the All-Father, god of wisdom, war, and death, gave up his eye for knowledge, loved poetry and battle. Thor, the Thunderer, god of strength and storms, protected humanity with his hammer Mjolnir. Freya, goddess of love, fertility, and magic, chose half the dead for her own hall. Loki, the trickster, unpredictable and dangerous, both friend and enemy of the gods. They believed in 9 realms, all connected by the world tree Yggdrasil. The end of the world was coming, Ragnarok, a final battle between gods and monsters. This spiritual worldview gave the Vikings a fearlessness in battle. Death wasn't the end. It was a ticket to Valhalla, Odin's hall for fallen warriors. But eventually, that worldview would be challenged by the rise of Christianity. By the 9th century, the Norse world began bursting at the seams. Limited farmland, family rivalries, and a thirst for wealth pushed many Vikings to seek fortune across the seas. But here's the key point. They didn't just raid, they built, settled, traded, and even ruled. Let's trace their footsteps across the known world and beyond. Vikings in the British Isles. The British Isles were one of the Vikings' favorite targets, and eventually homes. Ireland was raided as early as 795 AD. Monasteries and coastal towns were vulnerable, and soon Norse settlers began building long forts, fortified camps, along rivers. These evolved into full Viking towns like Dublin, which the Norse founded in 841 AD. In Scotland, they took over the Hebrides, Orkney, and Shetland Islands, launching raids and blending with local populations. But it was in England where Viking influence was most dramatic. After Lindisfarne, waves of raiders continued arriving. In 865, the so-called Great Heathen Army, led by the sons of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok, invaded. They didn't just plunder, they stayed. By the 800s and 70s, the Vikings controlled large swaths of England. They ruled the north and east, known as the Danelaw. Their rule brought new laws, language, place names, like those ending in by or thorpe, and customs. Still, they were resisted. One of their fiercest opponents was King Alfred of Wessex, later called Alfred the Great. He fought back using guerrilla tactics, building fortified towns, burhs, and even launching his own navy. His descendants would eventually reclaim England, but the Norse legacy remained. Normandy, Vikings become French lords. In 911, the Frankish king Charles the Simple struck a deal with a Viking chieftain named Rollo. The deal: stop raiding, defend the Seine River, and convert to Christianity in exchange for land. Rollo agreed. His new territory was called Normandy, named for the Northmen. Within a few generations, these Vikings were speaking French, dressing like nobles, and becoming powerful players in European politics. And in 1066, Rollo's great-great-great-grandson, William the Conqueror, would cross the English Channel and take the English crown at the Battle of Hastings. A Viking descendant became King of England. Eastbound, the Varangians. While the Norwegians and Danes went west, the Swedish Vikings, or Varangians, went east, navigating the great rivers of Russia and Ukraine. They established key trade routes along the Dnieper and Volga rivers, connecting the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea and the Caspian. This trade linked the Norse to the Byzantine Empire, the Islamic Caliphate, and beyond. Cities like Novgorod and Kiev began as Viking trading posts. In fact, the name Russia may derive from the Norse word rus, meaning rowers, the name Slavic people gave to these seafaring newcomers. One of the most fascinating roles the Varangians played was as bodyguards to the Byzantine emperor. This elite unit, known as the Varangian Guard, was composed of Norse warriors known for their fierce loyalty and unmatched fighting skills. They guarded emperors, fought in foreign wars, and even carved graffiti in runes into the walls of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, proof they were really there. Iceland, Greenland, and the edge of the world. In the late 9th century, Norwegian settlers began sailing west, first to the Faroe Islands, then to Iceland. Iceland became a Norse republic, with its own parliament, the Althing, founded in 930 AD. It's one of the oldest parliaments in the world, but not everyone stayed. In the year 982, a man named Eric the Red was exiled from Iceland for murder. With nothing left to lose, he sailed even further west and discovered a frozen island with icy fjords and treacherous seas. He named it Greenland, hoping the name would attract settlers. It worked. The Viking colony in Greenland lasted for over 400 years. They farmed, hunted seals, and even built churches. But eventually, harsh weather, isolation, and lack of trade led to its decline. Still, Eric's son would go even further. Vinland, Vikings in North America. Around the year 1000 AD, Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, set sail westward, following tales of a mysterious land spotted by another sailor named Bjarni Herjolfsson. What he found was a land of wild grapes, rich forests, and new animals. He named it Vinland, the land of wine. Archaeological evidence found at L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada, confirms that Norse settlers built a short-lived colony there, 500 years before Columbus. They likely stayed for a few seasons, trading, exploring, and clashing with the local indigenous peoples. But the settlement was abandoned, perhaps due to conflict or supply issues. Still, it's one of the most remarkable stories in history. The Vikings, with no compass, no maps, and no metal hulls, reached the New World. Vikings as traders. One of the biggest misconceptions about Vikings is that they were only raiders. In reality, many were merchants, and the Viking world was deeply connected to global trade networks. They traded amber from the Baltic, fur from Scandinavia and Russia, iron weapons, slaves, sadly, a major commodity, and in return they received silver, silks, spices, glassware, and wine from the Islamic world and Byzantium. Arabic coins, known as dirhams, have been found in Viking graves as far north as Sweden. This shows the extent of their economic reach. They weren't just warriors, they were businessmen. If you could visit just one Viking site, would it be Vinland in Canada, a longhouse in Iceland, or the Varangian barracks in Constantinople? Drop your answer below and tell us why. The Viking Age didn't end with a bang. It faded out, slowly and dramatically. But the impact of the Norse didn't vanish. Instead, it evolved, leaving echoes in language, law, genetics, and the map of Europe itself. Let's uncover how and why the Viking Age came to a close and what remains of them today. The beginning of the end. By the mid-11th century, the world was changing fast. The very things that had allowed the Vikings to flourish, fractured kingdoms, weak coastal defenses, and unguarded monasteries, were beginning to disappear. Here's what happened. Christianity changed everything. When the Viking raids began, Europe was Christian, and the Norse were staunchly pagan. But over time, the tides turned. Missionaries like Ansgar traveled north to spread the gospel. At first, Christianity was tolerated, just another god in a crowded pantheon. But as Norse kings realized the political advantages of aligning with Christian rulers, conversion accelerated. Harald Bluetooth, yes, that's who Bluetooth technology is named after, was baptized in the 960s and ordered the Christianization of Denmark. Olaf Tryggvason and Olaf Haraldsson, Saint Olaf, spread Christianity through Norway, sometimes by force. Iceland adopted Christianity in the year 1000 through a peaceful vote at the Althing, the world's oldest surviving parliament. With Christianization came churches, monasteries, and a new world view. Pagan burials, sacrifices, and rituals faded. The old gods retreated into legend, replaced by saints and bishops. And with this religious shift came a change in identity. Norsemen no longer saw themselves as outsiders or raiders, but as citizens of Christendom. Centralized kingdoms took root. In the early Viking Age, power was spread out. Small chieftains ruled regions, and independent jarls commanded loyalty from local followers. But by the 11th century, that was changing. Kings like Nut the Great ruled vast multinational empires, in his case, Denmark, Norway, and England. Power was consolidating, and these kings no longer wanted rival lords going Viking and causing diplomatic problems. Instead of rewarding raiding, central governments imposed order, and often taxation. Ironically, Vikings helped build the very kingdoms that ended their way of life. Defenses improved across Europe. When the first longships arrived, most coastal towns were sitting ducks. They had no warning systems, no organized militias, and no walls. But after decades of Viking raids, Europe learned. Cities fortified their ports, monasteries hired guards, towns built watchtowers and organized militias. In short, it became harder and more dangerous to raid, and less profitable. Vikings shifted toward trade and settlement, and eventually assimilation. Internal conflicts and climate change. Another factor in the decline was internal Viking conflict. As Norse kingdoms grew, so did rivalries. Civil wars broke out in Norway and Denmark, weakening their ability to project power abroad. Add to that a worsening climate, known as the medieval cold period, and agriculture became harder in places like Greenland and Iceland. The Greenland colonies, which once thrived, eventually collapsed. Icelandic settlers struggled to survive brutal winters and volcanic disruptions. Vinland was abandoned. Survival took priority over expansion. If we had to choose one moment to mark the symbolic end of the Viking Age, it would be the Battle of Stamford Bridge on September 25th, 1066. The Norwegian king Harald Hardrada, one of the most legendary warriors of the era, sailed to England with thousands of troops, hoping to claim the English throne. At first, he won a major victory at Fulford. But just days later, the new English king, Harold Godwinson, marched his army north in record time and launched a surprise attack at Stamford Bridge. Harald Hardrada was killed, along with the majority of his army. It was a crushing defeat, one that marked the end of large-scale Viking invasions. Ironically, just 3 weeks later, King Harold Godwinson was defeated at the Battle of Hastings by William the Conqueror, a descendant of Vikings himself. And so, the age that began with Ragnar and Lindisfarne ended with William and Hastings. Even after their era ended, the Vikings left a deep mark on history, in ways you can still see today. Language and place names. Old Norse blended with the local languages wherever the Vikings went. In England alone, hundreds of place names bear their influence. Bee, meaning farm or town, Derby, Grimsby, Whitby. Thorpe, village, Scunthorpe, Althorpe. Thwaite, clearing, Applethwaite, Satterthwaite. Common English words also come from Old Norse: sky, window, egg, knife, skull, anger, freckle. Even our days of the week reflect Norse gods. Tuesday, Tuesday. Wednesday, Odin's Day. Thursday, Thor's Day. Friday, Freya's Day. laws and customs. The Viking legal tradition, especially the idea of the Thing, a public assembly for law and dispute resolution, influenced later European and Icelandic governance. Iceland's Althing still exists today as one of the oldest parliamentary institutions in the world. Their emphasis on personal freedom, honor, and compensation rather than punishment helped shape early legal systems across Northern Europe. Norse mythology and culture. The stories of the Norse gods, heroes, and monsters still inspire today's pop culture, from Tolkien's Middle-earth to Marvel's Thor. Viking themes run through video games, heavy metal, fantasy literature, and TV shows like Vikings and The Last Kingdom. And their belief in fate, courage, and facing the end with pride continues to resonate. Exploration and expansion. The Vikings were the first Europeans to reach North America. The settlements in Greenland were among the most remote outposts of the medieval world. Their maps, sagas, and voyages prove that they were not just warriors, but fearless explorers. Genetic legacy. Recent DNA studies have confirmed Viking ancestry in populations across Britain, Ireland, and even parts of France, Russia, and Ukraine. The Viking Age may have ended, but its people never disappeared. They married locals, raised children, and became part of the societies they once raided. So why does the Viking Age still fascinate us? Maybe it's the contrast between savage raids and stunning art, between blood feuds and democratic assemblies, between brutal combat and poetic sagas. Maybe it's because they embody something primal, the human spirit of exploration, risk, defiance, and legacy. The Vikings remind us that history is messy, that people aren't just heroes or villains, they're both. Farmers and warriors, poets and pirates, saints and sinners. And in their longships, they carried more than weapons. They carried stories, beliefs, ideas, and those ripples still reach us today. If this journey through Viking history sparked your imagination, show it some love. Smash that like button like a Norse axe. Subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into epic civilizations. And comment below. What surprised you most about the Vikings? Was it their reach, their laws, their myths? Let's talk about it. Thanks for watching. And remember, history isn't just what happened. It's the legacy we live with today.